thing. For the cycle, Martin, it's yours.
That was the Reverend Torre. Thank you so much, Torre, preaching there. And good afternoon. It's Friday, January the 4th, and prepare yourselves. We have a hostage situation in the nation's capital. No single person is being threatened, just the entire U.S. economy.
So we're waiting. Oh, here we go. We're getting the numbers.
We got the jobs report.
Oh, we did.
155,000 jobs added.
Non-farm payrolls rose by 155,000.
Now we're talking about the debt limit. We're talking about the full faith and credit of the United States.
Our government has built up too much debt.
The debt ceiling is a much more serious threat to the economy than the fiscal cliff.
Our opportunity here is on the debt ceiling. Save your powder for the debt ceiling fight. We Republicans need to be willing to tolerate a temporary partial government shutdown.
Now comes the debt ceiling. I think that's frankly a dead loser.
We can't not pay bills that we've already incurred.
Extraordinary challenges demand extraordinary leadership. Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay.
You know, Obama won the presidency. I mean, Republicans have to come to grips with certain realities.
The first Friday of the new year, and I do trust that your resolutions are holding firm. And as with any given Friday, Republicans are resolute in their opposition to the president and his agenda for the nation. Just this afternoon, Vice President Joe Biden presided over a joint session of Congress to count the electoral votes for president and vice president of the United States. Newsflash, President Obama won. It is now a matter of congressional record, yes. So it's down to business. And now that John Boehner has dried his tears over being re-elected House Speaker, he's huddling with the team, preparing to block that debt limit. Yes, Mr. Boehner reportedly told his House Republicans this morning that they'll use the debt limit as leverage to cut spending and reform entitlements. That's their strategy after the president flatly asserted he's not willing to negotiate with Republicans over raising the nation's borrowing limit. Master plan, right?
Now comes the debt ceiling. I think that's frankly a dead loser. Yeah. Because in the end, you know what's going to happen. The whole national financial system is going to come into Washington by television and say, oh, my God, this will be a gigantic heart attack. The entire economy of the world will collapse. You guys can't be responsible. And they'll cave.
A dead loser, OK? But don't be so sure that Republicans will listen to Coach Newt. Just look at the battle over relief aid for Superstorm Sandy. 68 days after the storm, the House just managed today to pass a $9.7 billion package of aid for flood insurance claims. That only after an uproar when Speaker Boehner yanked a vote on a larger $60 billion package of aid before the 112th Congress finished its business earlier this week. Mr. Boehner promised the vote after top Northeast Republicans urged local donors to stop giving to the GOP. But take note, 67 votes were cast against the aid. All Republicans, including erstwhile vice presidential candidate one, Mr. Paul Ryan. NBC's Mike Viqueira joins us now live from the Capitol. Mike, let's begin with that House vote on providing initial assistance for flood damage caused by Hurricane Sandy. Paul Ryan joined 66 other Republicans in voting against it. He said this in a statement: this legislation proposes to increase the National Flood Insurance Program borrowing authority by $9.7 billion. It would be irresponsible to raise an insolvent program's debt ceiling without making the necessary reforms President Obama and Congress owe the people of New York and New Jersey better. So, Mike, he'd prefer the victims of Sandy, I guess, to continue sleeping in their cars, to be homeless for much longer, maybe a few more months, until the flood program undergoes extensive reform. Is that correct?
And there's no guarantee, Martin, that the House of Representatives is going to pass that full $60 billion that you talked about that already passed the Senate. Yeah, Paul Ryan was joined with the hardest of the hardcore fiscal conservatives, 67 of them, and voting against
fiscal conservatives, Mike, they sound like callous conservatives.
Well, that might be the interpretation from some, particularly in the tri-state area where you are located, Martin. But they voted against it for the reasons that Paul Ryan said. You know, they said it wasn't paid for. They said that the flood insurance program is essentially a bankrupt program. They're essentially raising the debt ceiling on that. They object to that. Obviously, they were victims themselves of a tidal wave of support. 354 bipartisan members of the House of Representatives passed it, and then they came over to the Senate. Martin, you don't often see this. I mean, it happened in about the blink of an eye. It was bibbity-bop, bibbity-boop. The Senate waved their hands over it. That's being sent now to the president. However, that other tranche, that second half of that, well, it's more than half, 50 billion of it, Republicans are already saying they have, quote-unquote, scrubbed the pork from it, and they're going to reduce that. So this fight isn't certainly not over yet, and some of the more substantial areas of relief that many members of the congressional delegation from New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut are going to be looking for come January 15th, when that's supposed to hit the floor, Martin.
But Mike, going back to Congressman Ryan, in 2008, he voted in favor of additional disaster response funding for the flood-ravaged Midwest. It was called Roll Call Vote 432.
Yeah.
To be precise, you know, he touted it in his own press release. So has he lost all compassion in the last 4 years, or does he just not like people in the Northeast? I mean, what is the problem here?
Well, Martin, I cannot look into the man's heart, but we can look. We can look at the fact that his own district around Racine, Wisconsin, Jamestown, was affected by some of that flooding in 2008. That was an enormous bill. I looked it up. Your producer sent me that roll call number. Great work there. That was a $162 billion catch-all of the old school in Congress that had all kinds of stuff in it. I mean, there was money there for overseas operations. There was money for military construction. There was money for flood relief. That was in 2008, and Paul Ryan and a lot of other people went along and voted for that. You're right, Martin.
Of course, he continued to tell us, didn't he, during the campaign, that he doesn't duck the tough issues. Mike Viqueira, thank you as always.
Okay.
I'd like to bring in Democratic Congressman Jim Moran, joining us live from Arlington, Virginia. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Nice to be with you, Martin.
Thank you for joining us on this Friday afternoon. If the last debt ceiling fight put the entire recovery, the economic recovery of the nation at risk, if consumer confidence and business confidence plunged, if growth dropped, if the United States credit worthiness was downgraded, and if the fight is estimated to cost almost $19 billion over the next 10 years, then, sir, why would anyone in their right mind want to do that again in 4 to 6 weeks?
Well, that's a rhetorical question, as it was meant to be, Martin. I voted against it, and unfortunately, the vast majority of the Congress thought it was a good idea, including the vast majority of Democrats. But unfortunately, I think we've set ourselves up for 3 more fiscal cliffs. And you know, in each one of them, it's the American people that are going to be held hostage. Some of them may be aware of it, others not, but the reality is that it's, when you talk about the full faith and credit of the United States government being at risk of what the Congress does, which it will be in another month and a half, really, you know, it undermines the kind of confidence that the rest of the world needs to be able to place in us, let alone the people who invest in our Treasury bills and the private sector that makes decisions based upon the competence of government decision making.
But these aren't, sir, these are not so-called extremists who are determined to hold the entire economy hostage. Here's Senator John Cornyn of Texas. In the words of his own editorial, it may be necessary to partially shut down the government in order to secure the long-term fiscal well-being of our country.
And the fact is, we're not securing the long-term fiscal well-being of anything. What they don't take into adequate consideration is that the private sector capitalism can't survive, let alone flourish, without the federal government playing a robust role in supporting it. I mean, it was World War II that rescued the world from the Great Depression. Imagine if we hadn't made the investment in the GI Bill and housing and educational benefits for that created the middle class in America. Imagine if Dwight Eisenhower hadn't invested in an interstate highway system.
Imagine if this nation hadn't offered that assistance to Europe, where I grew up. The Marshall Plan and so on.
The Marshall Plan. Where would we be without the Marshall? And let me say, too, because the things that are now going to get cut are particularly in research and innovation and education and physical infrastructure. We wouldn't have had the internet if it hadn't been for government research. We wouldn't have satellite communication. We wouldn't have the barcode. We wouldn't have so many the things that the National Institutes of Health have come up with to treat disease. We have to work in partnership with the private sector, and you have to spend about 20% of GDP in terms of government investment. This decision that was just made on New Year's Day, it's going to limit government investment to substantially less than that. We've never had a robust economy without the public sector doing its share. And the smart people in the private sector understand that. Unfortunately, I'm not so sure that the folks that represent the legislative branch in the today fully comprehends that. And I'm afraid that the American people are going to suffer for it, particularly over the next 3 months when we have 3 more fiscal cliffs where everyone is going to be confused. And the fact is that I think this was a Pyrrhic victory. When you take $3.9 trillion of revenue off the table, all of it is added to the deficit, and then you set up a situation where the only questions being asked are what programs are we going to cut and how deeply are we going to cut them. We're going to pay a price for this, but most importantly, our children and grandchildren will pay the steepest price.
And Congressman, a final question to you. I wonder if I might get your reaction to the news today that Congressman Paul Ryan, once a vice presidential candidate for this nation, chose to vote against the bill before the House today in relation to flood relief following the devastation caused by Hurricane Sandy.
Martin, many of us read Ayn Rand's books, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, and The Virtue of Selfishness, but we didn't believe it. We didn't take it to heart. That's what this is all about, taking care of yourself and the heck with anyone else. It's not recognizing that we're a national community. If a hurricane or a tornado had gone through Janesville, Wisconsin, he wouldn't feel the same way. He didn't feel the same way with the Midwest flooding. But this is about the Northeast, and so the heck with them. We can't function as a country that way. We're all in this together, and when we work together, recognizing and having some empathy for others when they're suffering, just like the folks in the Gulf Coast realized that the government needed to come to the rescue with Hurricane Katrina, we all came together and we helped rebuild New Orleans and the like. That's what we need to be doing with the shoreline in New York and New Jersey. We're in this together. E pluribus unum. That's what works. Not the Ayn Rand's virtuous selfishness, and not this narrow-minded, mean-spirited attitude that so many people in the Republican majority in the House believe in today. It's wrong, it's misguided, and it's going to take us in exactly the wrong direction from where we need to be going in the future.
Amen to that, Congressman Jim Moran. Sir, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stay with us, much more ahead.
We cannot be about business as usual, and that's what my vote was. It was a statement. We can't be about business as usual.
Why are they here? If they're just here to vote no, I mean, we could train a monkey to come and vote no.
Because, darling, you're the one in the moon. Don't stick around and just look at me. Why won't you dance?